One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they pseudo-study. So pseudo-studying is when you are studying, but you're not really studying. So you might be reading a textbook, but you're kind of reading it lazily. You're not really processing the information, so you're just wasting your time. It's the complete opposite of studying smart. Instead, you should be aiming to study actively. So ask yourself questions, summarize your notes, things like that. And studying actively is maybe the single most important thing when it comes to studying smarter. So how exactly do you do that? How do you make your studying more efficient so you're not wasting so much time? And before I answer that, real quick before we start, I've recently added 2.5 hours of extra lessons to the Transform Your Grades in 30 Days course, and I'm going to keep improving it and adding to it. My aim is to really make it this one-stop shop where if you're seriously looking to improve your grades, then the Transform Your Grades course has everything you need in a neat little package, from more than 5 hours of lessons, one-on-one support from me, quizzes, a workbook, a productivity planner, a private community, and various other bonuses too. So hit the link in the description. There's currently a 50% promotional offer happening right now. But back to studying smart, I want to introduce you to the SQ3R method of studying and go through how I use it to study smarter and more efficiently. And SQ3R is a reading comprehension method named for its 5 steps: survey, question, read, recite, and review. It's a method used to help with learning and processing information, because I'm sure you've been in a position where you've read an entire page of a textbook, but after you finish reading it, you forgot everything you just read. And the SQ3R method is designed to prevent exactly that from happening. It's a 5-step system, so I'll go through each step. Survey. So before you even read anything, whether it's a chapter of a book, your lecture notes, or even your own notes, you should spend a few minutes skimming through the text to gather the important information. So things like reading the title, skimming through the introductions and conclusions to orient yourself to the most important points of each chapter. And you take notes of all bold headings and subheadings, and notice any charts, maps, or other diagrams. And the reason why this step is so important is twofold. So firstly, your brain can process information a lot faster if it has a rough idea of what to expect. So if you already know what each paragraph is kind of about, then when you go to read it properly, you'll be able to process and retain that information a lot more efficiently. And secondly, you're not just reading the text once, but you're reading the main points twice. We really want to move away from just reading passively, where you read a block of text, but then you forget what it says. And this survey step is the first step in doing that. Question. The question stage is, in my opinion, the most important step in this whole process. So during the initial survey of the material, you're encouraged to create questions about the text. These questions that you write out will not only give you kind of these study questions for later on, but they will also help you consider what you already know and how that fits in with what you are about to learn. So the better the questions are, the better your comprehension is likely to be, because the questions give you purpose. You need a purpose when you're reading, so you need to have a goal in mind, because when your mind is actively searching for answers to questions, it becomes engaged learning, because you can literally spend 8 hours learning passively, but you might not be studying at all. It's important that you turn your passive learning into engaged learning so that you actually remember what you read. And I made an entire video on this topic: study smart, not hard, passive versus active studying. You can click on the pop-out banner above to watch it, because by increasing your active studying, you can literally cut your studying time in half and still process the same amount of information. Read. Now that you've skimmed the text and created your questions, it's finally time to read. So at this point, you've already created an organized plan for what you're about to learn, but now you're plugging in the rest of the information. You should now be reading with a purpose in mind, and that purpose is to answer the questions that you wrote down earlier. And those questions encourage you to be actively thinking about what you're reading, so you're not just reading the text passively. You can also write down new questions too that you can answer later on. Recite. The recite stage is what really sets SQ3R apart from just rereading or taking notes. After each paragraph, stop and recall your questions and see if you can actually answer them from memory. So this involves setting aside the text and saying out loud everything you have learned. And this is taking advantage of active recall. And if you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you'll know how highly I regard the active recall method. It really is an incredibly effective strategy that I use still to this day. So you look back at your questions and you see if you can answer them from memory. But if you can't, then you look back at the text again, and after a few minutes, close the book and try answering the questions again. And you keep doing this until you can answer all the questions, but don't move to the next section until you can recite the answers from the previous section. And this step, the recite step of the SQ3R method, is crucial because you're stimulating your brain to recall the information and move it from your short-term memory over to your long-term memory, so you'll be able to remember it for longer. And there have been countless studies that show the process of testing actually helps you recall information better than if you are not quizzed at all. It's exactly why I added so many quizzes in the Transform Your Grades course. I think we've added about 38 separate quizzes in there, one after each lecture, because it's this active recall and answering questions about what you just learned that really helps the information stick. Review. After reciting everything you can remember, it's time to review the text for anything that you skipped or anything that you didn't quite understand or couldn't recall. So once you've finished the entire chapter using the steps I mentioned, go back over the questions you created for every heading and see if you can still answer them. If not, look back and refresh your memory and then continue. And this review stage gives you instant feedback about how well you processed and retained the information. The SQ3R method is how I study at university, but after a while, you'll realize that you'll just end up doing it naturally. So for example, when you start reading a chapter in a textbook, you won't actually be thinking, oh, let's use the SQ3R method, right? But you'll just kind of do it automatically. Like you'll just start writing out questions naturally, and that's really where you want to be, where you're using these kinds of advanced study methods without even having to think much about it. And if you want to learn about more study methods just like SQ3R, I made a video on the study methods that I personally recommend and the methods that I think that you should avoid. You can click on the card on the screen. And I also made a video on how I'm able to study for 14 hours a day. Again, you can click on the card on the screen, and if you do need a bit of extra support with your studying, like I mentioned earlier, you can check out the Transform Your Grades course, where there's currently a 50% sale, link in the description below.